When we look at how the world's wealthiest individuals actually build their fortunes, we see it is rarely through a standard paycheck. Looking at this breakdown, a massive 75% are entrepreneurs who have built businesses and equity. Another 15% are investors. The remaining 10% is made up of inheritors or those with rare elite skills. This reality highlights a fundamental truth, which is the stark divide. If you do not own assets, you are essentially chained, owned by the system that employs you. But on the flip side, if you own assets, you own your future. Let's look at why that is. Under the standard model of modern financial dependency, your hard-earned income goes straight into a basket of immediate needs. It is entirely consumed by survival costs, food, shelter, and water. Because every dollar goes out as fast as it comes in, you are left with absolutely no room for growth. This keeps people trapped in a continuous loop where they work for income, spend on survival, and have nothing left to save. To break this cycle, you need a new path. You need to manage money like the top 1% using a structured framework. We call this the 25-15-50-10 rule. This system isn't about how much you make. It's about the deliberate allocation of every single dollar. As you can see here, you intentionally divide your income into specific buckets for living, investing, protecting, and giving. The most important takeaway from this entire framework is that implementing this specific disciplined allocation is the only reliable way to move away from modern-day slavery and step into true financial autonomy. So, how do we start putting this rule into practice? Let's take a closer look at the very first step, which is dedicating that initial 25% of your income toward buying assets that grow. Now that we understand the necessity of breaking out of the survival trap, let's look at how we actually do it. The golden rule is that the first 25% of all your income must be immediately directed toward growth. And to be crystal clear, this is not about personal development, like taking a meditation class. It's strictly about purchasing real assets that increase in value over time. Look at the typical path. Most people pay their bills and then spend whatever's left over on temporary goods. But the top 1% think differently. They prioritize acquiring assets that work quietly in the background, building wealth while they sleep. And when you are building this foundation, remember that time is vastly more critical than the sheer size of your investment. To truly understand why time is your greatest asset, let's compare two investors, Billy and Phil. Billy gets off to an early start. He begins at age 20, committing to investing just $200 a month. Phil decides to wait. He doesn't start until age 30. Realizing he has lost a decade, he tries to catch up by putting in $300 a month. Let's track them both to age 60. Because Phil was playing catch-up and contributing more each month, he actually contributed a total of $108,000 out of his own pocket. Billy, spreading smaller payments over a longer timeline, only contributed $96,000. But assuming they both achieved a 10% average annual return, which is the historical benchmark for the S&P 500, the compound interest tells a wild story. Phil's portfolio grows to about $678,000. Billy's portfolio, however, explodes to over $1.26 million. That creates a staggering wealth advantage of over $600,000 for Billy. This perfectly illustrates the power of compound growth. Waiting to invest is a massive cost that you simply cannot easily repay by just contributing more money later on. So where should you invest? Growth assets exist across a spectrum of risk and reward. At the foundational lower risk level, we have index funds like the S&P 500, which let you own a broad piece of the market without having to time your trades. Moving slightly up the spectrum, we find physical real estate alongside REITs, which allow you to invest in property markets without the hassle of being a landlord. As we seek higher rewards, We have to take on more risk and active involvement, like developing high-income skills or building online businesses. Finally, at the highest risk level, we find individual stocks, Bitcoin, and NFTs. You should treat these as moonshots to explore only after your secure foundation is built. Crucially, building wealth isn't just about generating returns, it's about protecting them. Utilizing tax-advantaged accounts is mandatory. If you are in the UK, the Stocks and Shares ISA lets you invest up to £20,000 annually, completely tax-free. In the US, the Roth IRA allows your post-tax contributions to grow and be withdrawn without paying a dime in taxes, a strategy famous investors use to build tax-exempt billions. And always take advantage of workplace pensions and 401k plans. The employer match is essentially a guaranteed return on your investment. Once you have these foundational pieces and accounts in place, the final step is transitioning from planning to flawless execution through automation. To wrap up the growth phase, we need to move from planning to execution through automation. Remember, wealth is truly built by consistency over time, not by sitting around analyzing charts all day. An incredibly robust and simple strategy to set up is the three-fund portfolio. This consists of three parts: a U.S. stock index fund to capture domestic growth, an international stock index fund for broad global diversification, and a bond fund to provide stability when markets get rocky. For instance, you can use a platform like Trading 212 to create a pie that automates this. You might include the Vanguard S&P 500 for your U.S. exposure, the iShares MSCI World for your global exposure, and iShares USD Treasury bonds for that safety net. Your specific allocation will depend on your risk tolerance, but an aggressive approach might look like this 90% stock and 10% bond split you see here. When choosing these funds, make sure you select the accumulation versions. This means that any dividends are automatically reinvested right back into the fund, which massively accelerates the compounding effect. Once you have these transfers automated to happen right on payday, your focus shifts completely away from managing the portfolio and toward increasing your primary income to feed this wealth-building machine. Now, while that 25% is driving your growth forward, we must dedicate 15% of your income to stability. Think of this as your margin for error. This shield prevents major setbacks, ensuring that a single unexpected event doesn't derail all your financial progress. Without this stability, people are often forced into high-interest debt or have to sell their growth assets at a loss when the market is down. To build this, you first need to calculate your baseline month. This is the absolute bare minimum cost of survival, your groceries, your rent, and your basic utilities. Your goal is to save 5 months' worth of this baseline into a dedicated stability fund. For this fund to work properly, it has to follow 3 strict rules. First, it must be accessible within 24 hours. Second, it must carry zero risk, meaning absolutely no stocks or crypto. And third, keep it in a high-yield savings account to help fight off inflation. To fill this fund faster, you can use tactics like the paycheck sweep, making a strict replacement promise to yourself to immediately refill any withdrawals, or using roundup apps for effortless passive saving. Once your growth and stability systems are automated, we can finally look at how to handle the largest chunk of your income, your everyday essentials. Let's talk about the largest portion of your income. We want to allocate exactly 50% to our essentials. What exactly are essentials? They are simply the things that keep you alive and functioning. I'm talking about basic needs like housing, groceries, utilities, insurance, and functional clothing. These are non-negotiables for survival, not things meant to feed your ego. Now, you might wonder why so many people still struggle financially, even when they earn a lot of money.
It's usually because of a trap called lifestyle creep. When you start earning a high income, it's incredibly tempting to start making luxury purchases, like upgrading to an expensive car or buying designer items. The real danger happens when these luxuries get rebranded in your mind as necessities. To keep your essential spending strictly under that 50% limit, you have to aggressively manage your two largest expenses. First is housing. This means exploring house hacking, choosing more affordable neighborhoods, or actively renegotiating your rent. Second is transport. Instead of falling for expensive car leases, choose reliable, used vehicles and consciously look for ways to reduce your fuel costs. Managing all of this requires systems over willpower. Willpower fades, but if our decision-making is governed by solid rules, it automatically leads to consistent, intentional choices. One of the best systems you can use is evaluating purchases by cost per use rather than brand name. For example, instead of immediately buying a $100 brand name shirt that you'll rarely wear, compare it to a $25 better value shirt that fits into your daily rotation. When you pull out the calculator, the actual cost per use will tell you if it's truly a valuable addition to your life. For anything outside of your immediate needs, implement the 7-day rule. When you get the urge and want to buy a non-essential item, force yourself to wait. From day 1, you give yourself a cooling-off period until day 7. You only hit that buy button if you reassess a week later and find it still holds genuine value. Here is the ultimate takeaway to remember. If a purchase doesn't genuinely improve your life or your daily functionality, it has no place in your 50% allocation. By locking down your essentials efficiently, you actually free up resources for the final 10% of your plan, which we will dedicate to rewarding yourself and making your lifestyle sustainable.
We've covered the essentials, but now let's talk about the final 10%, which is dedicated entirely to rewards. Why is this important? Because having a built-in reward system is exactly what ensures your financial plan remains sustainable over the long haul. Think about it like a strict diet. Total deprivation simply leads to burnout. When you restrict yourself too much for too long, you inevitably break and end up going on frantic overspending sprints. In fact, statistics show that 92% of people who try extreme restriction eventually blow all their savings. Instead of fighting human nature, you should view this 10% as a highly strategic cheat meal for your finances. It keeps you sane and on track. Now, how should you actually spend it? To maximize the psychological payoff, you want to focus on experiences and connections. We're talking about things like vacations, hobbies, and social outings. Notice what is crossed out here? You want to avoid wasting this on just accumulating more material goods. Experiences are powerful because they provide lasting benefits, like unforgettable memories, crucial stress relief, and ultimately higher productivity when you return to your day-to-day work. To manage this practically, I recommend you set up a dedicated joy jar or a completely separate bank account. By automating that 10% transfer every time you get paid, you ensure that your fun money is both guilt-free and strictly capped. You can spend it without worry, knowing you haven't compromised your future. Let's bring it all together. When you faithfully follow this overall 25, 15, 50, 10 distribution, you fundamentally shift your life's trajectory. You break out of the exhausting cycle of just working for money, and you transition into a powerful position where your owned assets and disciplined systems do the heavy lifting for you. Ultimately, putting this structure into place is what provides you with permanent financial freedom.